Well,
What about the rapture? What is that about? Well, raptus is the Latin word for seized, from rapire, to seize in Roman law, and it's a term that was covered. It covered the crimes of property and women who were considered property, the seizing of a bride in an instant. It's the harvest of the earth too, um, but it's the bride that's going to get seized. Now, seeing these overcomers, the rest of humanity will submit to these teachers of Torah. Now, those that are seized are going to be Torah teachers. And then after we're changed, we're going to be pretty distinguishable because we're going to be blazing light. People are going to go, whoa, there's one of them. And they're going to say, let's listen to what he says because he's right. Because there won't be any errors or dragons deceiving people. So Christians are mistakenly believing that the coming of Yahusha is at the end of all things. You know, that's not the end. When he comes back, big time things are going to happen. The earth is going to be charred, you know, and we're going to go out like calves from the stall and trample upon the people under there. There are going to be ashes under our feet. That doesn't happen at the second resurrection. That happens at the first one. And they believe also, the Christians believe that there's no more chance for anyone to be saved. Well, the festivals of Yahuwah and their prophetic fulfillment are just not being studied because the circus fathers hated true Yisrael and they hated the Nazarene. They hated us when we were here, and they probably still do. But it's because we have the truth, and we're a problem for their authority, you know, because we're not trying to be an authority. We're just trying to tell people the truth. So many are going to be led to salvation during the Great Tribulation. And that's why we're going to be here during the Great Tribulation, you know. That's an important point. Because why would he take out the only hope that those left behind would ever have? See? Now, when did the current rapture idea begin exactly? The word rapture, as we see, was named, is a Latin word, but I think the Greek word is harpazo, and it means to seize something or snatch it away really quickly. The first use of the word rapture was by a man, as far as we know, religiously speaking, if we can use that word religiously. Uh, his name was John Darby, and he first proposed a pre-trib rapture in 1827. The Scottish minister Edward Irving, who died in 1834, just a few years later, promoted three gatherings. First, the first fruits of the harvest, the wise virgins who follow the Lamb whithersoever he goes, and next, the abundant harvest gathered afterwards by God, as he called it, and lastly, the assembling of the wicked for punishment. And this is where the Christians have adopted most of their ideas from these two men, John Darby and Edward Irving. And it started in 1827. Now, the first known theological use of the word rapture, found in print, occurs with the Schofield Reference Bible of 1909. That was the very first time the word rapture was ever read in print. 1909. And that was because of a book that was written in 1908. In 1908, the pre-trib rapture idea was popularized by a best-selling book called Jesus is Coming by William Blackstone, and it sold 1 million copies, and it influenced Schofield's 1909 translation. That was in 1908. In 1909, Schofield's Reference Bible came out, and it sold 2 million copies, and it promoted the pre-millennium rapture, and it hyped the sales. In 1957, decades later, a book was written called The Rapture Question, and it sold 65,000. In 1958, the next year, the book called Things to Come sold 215,000. And then in the 1970s, The Late Great Planet Earth book came out, sold 35 million. And then later in the 70s, a movie came out called The Thief in the Night. And it sold 215 million copies. And then from the 1970s through 1995, pretty much nothing happened except everybody was being taught the wrong thing, which a lot of us grew up learning, you know. In 1995, the book Left Behind came out, and it sold tens of millions. Plus, many movies have spun off from it and other books. So the doctrine of the rapture, in its misunderstood condition, continues to be an important component in American fundamentalist Christian eschatology. And it's challenging, if you even challenge any part of it, it's akin to heresy. And we've pretty much challenged it now. But here's a breakdown, a graphic breakdown. I'm going to try to widen this a little bit so I can see it better. Oops, okay then. Now there's 4 popular views from confusion over the first and second resurrections. We have the birth of the Messiah kind of starting out on this graph. And the most popular one is what most people believe is that, I'm going to start with the truth. The truth is actually the first one. It's the scripturally accurate view. There's the birth of the Messiah, and then at some point there's a tribulation. We're still here, and then Yahusha comes and the millennium begins. That's called the post-trib, premillennialism view. Now, the one that's most popular, which is a little flawed, and we're going to continue in progression as to which ones are more and more flawed. The first one is the correct one. Now, the next one is the most popular one, and it's the fundamentalist Christian view. They believe that Yahusha was born and then raised and all, and then there's a period of time, and then there's a rapture, and then there's a tribulation, and then there's a second coming, and then there's the millennium, and then there's the last judgment. And that's called the pre-trib, premillennialism view. Now, the next one in terms of error, let me see if I can get this. I'm having trouble with this mouse. Alrighty then. Now, in the darker green, no, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, now the next most error-ridden view is the second coming happens after a 1,000-year millennium, but there's no rapture at all. It's just a second coming and a last judgment. And that's called post-millennialism. So the 1,000 years of us reigning is actually accomplished by the works of men. Yahusha's not here. He doesn't return until the second coming at the end of the millennium. Now, the most error is found in the last view, and that's called amillennialism, which means there is no real millennium. It's just a figment of your imagination, or it's symbolic. The word millennial doesn't mean 1,000 years. And this is the Catholic view. There's a symbolic millennium, which could be any number of years, which apparently they believe is going on now. And they're forcing their way onto the earth and saying, we're the reign. We can pretty much see that in history. Wow. They were stomping them out, weren't they? All the tortures and killing masses of people, entire cities, some 83 million people just during a 600-year period. And then at the end, there's a second coming and a last judgment. Of course, where people wind up being, they don't really mention. But it's real confusing. But,
so the top one is the accurate one.
Yeah. We started with the most accurate one. Now, what is the true timing of the harvest? Well, we can think of the first resurrection as being the harvest. The workers, the wise managers, are our fellow believers working the true message of Torah among men, just as Jonah was sent to Nineveh to teach. They're the wise managers teaching the Besorah. That's the message. The reapers are the messengers, or the Malachim, the angels. in Greek. And they will first come to take away the offenders. They're not coming to take us away first. They're going to take away the offenders. Matthew 13 gives us this picture. In the harvest, when the days of the harvest come, now remember, Matthew 13, verse 30, let both grow together until the harvest. At the time of the harvest, I shall say to the reapers, and the reapers, of course, are the Malachim, the angels, first, gather the darnel, those are the weeds, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat, the chosen ones, into my granary. See, he interprets those in other parts of the scripture. Notice the process again in the words of Yahusha later in the same chapter. Thus it shall be at the end of the age, the messengers shall come forth and separate the wicked out of the midst of the righteous, and shall throw them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So the end of the age, the Gentiles, the end of the age of the Gentiles, Yahusha reigns with the overcomers. So we have to overcome by not worshiping the government, because the government is the taskmaster right now. If anybody doesn't notice that, maybe they ought to just look around and say, what? Maybe they are the taskmaster. I can feel it over here. We have the highest tax rate in the world, So they're wanting to dominate us. But here's an illustration, if we can put this up. The wicked are taken out of the midst of the righteous. Like that evil cow that's getting taken out of the nice cows down there. Now, let's read it again. Matthew 13, thus it shall be at the end of the age, the messengers shall come forth and separate the wicked out of the midst of the righteous, and shall throw them into the furnace of fire, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Now,
so it's actually the opposite.
Yeah, it is.
See?
And
so you actually want to be left behind.
You do. You want to be left behind. Proverbs also, in chapter 2, reveals the very same order of events, starting at verse 20. So walk in the way of goodness and guard the paths of righteousness, for the straight shall dwell in the earth, and the perfect be left in it. But the wrong shall be cut off from the earth, and the treacherous ones plucked out of it. So ask yourself, who is left behind? The straight, the perfect. And who is plucked out of it? The wrong, the treacherous ones.
What?